Hello, it's Eddie G's Music World for another week, October 15th, 2018. And we are moving along at a great pace, keeping up with a show a week, doing our best. And today we have a couple of things to do. It is a Rush retrospect, sort of a background on Rush, just in case people, don't know a whole lot about Rush. Give them some updates and information, and then return to the top 100 top 100 guitarists of all time, according to Rolling Stone. We're going to use their list and just comment on whatever type of knowledge I have about the guitars. I'll throw in a couple of comments if I don't know much or anything about them. I'll move on to other things. And okay, we're going to start with Rush. A lot of people, like I saw Geddy Lee being interviewed, and he says people come up to him and say the first show they ever saw was Rush. Well, in my case, it's actually true as well. In 1974, I was 14, and I had a friend, Richard Rosenblum, and we both really liked Nazareth, and we went to the show. And the two opening bands was Rush and Rory Gallagher. So I barely heard of either of those two. I don't think I ever heard of Rory Gallagher, and Rush I think were pretty new, so I didn't know who they were either. So it was a new experience for me to see these bands. It's also one of the few concerts where I do not have the ticket stub any longer. And it's a bit of a shame because I have scrapbooks of all the shows I've been to, hockey games, for sporting events, etc. But for that show, whatever happened to that ticket is long gone. But I barely remember the show. I do know that it was the Neil Peart era because I kind of looked up their tour where Neil Peart, the drummer, started, and it seems to be the 1974 tour where he went around North America at least. So I must have missed Glenn Rhoads, who was the first drummer who did quit, because I guess the touring, he had been touring a good 6, 7 years. Might have worn him out, apparently. So he took off from that group financially. It was not the greatest timing, but maybe with Rhoads playing all those years, they probably would never have been as big a band, since Neil Peart wrote a lot of the words and was a very, considered one of the greatest drummers. So it's quite possible that if Rhoads hadn't left, Rush never would have been as big. So we don't know, but they had one album with Rhoads, and it was considered a pretty popular album. So he was there for the first album and the first bit of success for Rush. So Rush started many years, I would say 1968 was their first show, so you got to figure it was pretty early on. I'm going on that first show, I heard that they got like $10 for the show. Maybe they split it up 3 ways or whatever it was. But they did a lot of shows around Toronto area, Ontario, maybe even Montreal, like in the late 60s, early 70s. I don't know if they came here back then before I saw them. No clue. They didn't mention it. I never heard about it. There was another bassist in that band at some point, Jeff Jones, but these are people that didn't last very long. Lindsey Young was in this band. Joe Perkins, maybe? I don't know. I can't read my own writing. Michael Bossy. These are people that was like kind of drifted in and out at the very early stages, the late 60s, my guess. But, then you got to consider the first album that they came out with was big, pretty big, or at least. And then most of this discussion is the Peart era, because the one album with Rhoads was big kind of in Canada, but you don't think of Glenn Rhoads much when you think about Rush. He's an afterthought type of guy, but I know that he passed away in the last few years. And but more or less, you go into this looking over Rush's career. They did struggle a lot. I mean, from 68 to 74 means you put in they were a bar band for many years before they got any kind of recognition. So that's a good 6 years of not making much money. They're probably unpacking and packing their own instruments. You know, they didn't have roadies back then. But, you know, that's typical. It's like, typical of a band that just starts out. Most people don't start out, selling millions of records. And once they did get established, let's say by the early, let's say 74, 75, 76 era, they were kind of like a cult band. They were not, they were like an anti-image band. They didn't have costumes, or they didn't have gimmicks. They just, didn't create music for top 40. I mean, you're talking about a band that you have to consider their starting point of albums was about 74. So you're talking since about 74, 75, 74 till about 2015, 14, something in there, was their recording span. So in those 41 years, 42, whatever, you're looking at one top 40 song, New World Man. So this isn't a band that was sitting there, let's write top 40 hits, let's write pop songs. They're not trying to compete with Elton John and Paul McCartney and Phil Collins and all these kind of like poppier kind of guys. At least Collins was poppy in his solo stuff, a lot of it. So, but despite the fact that they didn't create very commercial songs, they still became really, really huge band. I mean, they recorded Moving Pictures, at least that album, in Warren Heights, Le Studio, which has since burned down, and maybe even other albums there. I really don't know. Every album where it's recorded. The purpose of this retrospect is not like poring over every detail of the band, like little insignificant occurrences. Oh, it went to number 27 in Brazil. I really don't focus on minutia like that. Basically, give you what I feel is the most interesting part. I know that, for one thing, when I saw Rush the last, I think about 1 or 2 times ago, I was impressed with one thing. I think it was Subdivisions or one of those songs. He was playing bass, and the bass was still around his neck, and then pretty much with one hand he was switching down to his keyboard. So he was kind of playing them right before, like the bass, and then right after that the keyboards. And there might have been a couple of notes at the same time as the bass. Like, it was really impressive that he could manage to do 2 instruments either at the same time or one after the other. I've never seen that before to that extent. I've seen people switch guitars quite a bit, but go from the bass to the keyboards either simultaneously or right after one another is pretty impressive. And also Geddy Lee, he got his name because his real name was Gary, but he's Jewish, and his Yiddish mother, or his grandmother, was talking to him, and she didn't pronounce, her accent was very thick, so she didn't pronounce his name exactly. So she would call him Geddy instead of Gary. So that's how he got his name, Geddy. And his second name, I really don't know if it was Lee or not. I didn't look into that, but I do remember that tidbit about the first name. They were pretty innovative. There were times where Neil Peart decided to throw in rap, like in Roll the Bones. In the middle of that song, there was a bit of a rap type of break, which is pretty rare to see, that people can mix rock with rap in the same song. At least at the time, it was pretty impressive. They're kind of a private type of band. They weren't the kind that go on talk shows like Kimmel, and maybe at the time there was no Kimmel. It's not a good example. Carson, Letterman, that kind of thing. They may have done it a little, but they said it wasn't their style because they made them shorten their songs to do live sets and drop certain words from their performance, and they really didn't appeal to them to go to do that heavy amount of promotion in the States or Canada, maybe as well. Maybe a little bit. I know that Geddy Lee still lives in Toronto. He's not the kind that bought the mansion in Hollywood or whatever, which he can afford, and all the other guys, I think they also live there. These guys, like, they had pretty amazing set of instruments. I've seen them with double neck guitars and bass. Pretty extensive set of different instruments to go with. I did see them 5 times. Like I mentioned, I saw them as my first show. There was one time in there, I think it was the 3rd or 2nd show. It was in the old Forum, and the sound quality was miserable. I went with another friend, Steven, and it was like muffled type of thing. And it was a show that Max Webster opened up for them. And I don't know if the sound quality was bad. Our seats were decent. There were Rhoads, but I think we got halfway through the show after 7 or 8 songs, and we just decided to get out of there. We weren't enjoying the show. But other than that, the last time I saw them, I had really good seats, like pretty close to the stage. That was about 8-9 years ago, and I did enjoy that show. And more, they sold about 25 million albums in the U.S., albums/CDs, and 40 million worldwide. But I thought it was a little higher than this. But when I looked into the details of the band, I didn't see as many sales as I expected. But they sell videos too. Maybe that's a different category. They have been nominated for 7 Grammys, and they've also won, of course, Junos. They were inducted in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I believe Yes was on the bill with them because they were inducted the same year, and they even played, I think Yes played with Rush at the time of the induction. That was not long ago. That was about 2015 or 16 type of thing. I know Geddy Lee has had solo records. I think the other members too. Lifeson, he must have had. Peart, I don't know if he had a solo album or not. His act, Lifeson's act, was called Victor. And what was I trying to remember here? The record was the solo record for Geddy Lee was my favorite, Medicine. So that was his album or his act. And I know there was 2 kind of phases for Rush. If you go back to the first few albums up until the 80s, let's say the first 6 years of recording, it's much more emphasis on guitar, and also Geddy Lee was kind of screeching a little bit more when I first started listening to them, because they were played heavily in my area since it's Canadian content. I noticed a lot of screeching, so I don't think I was a super fan of theirs at the beginning. It was just a lot of noise. But later on, by the early 80s, 81, 82 to 89, they started to definitely soften their music. They became a little bit more vocally, a little more melodic and less screaming. And a lot more keyboards were added in. Synthesizers. Definitely changed the direction of the band and softened it a bit, but still hard rock, but just they blended in much more synthesizers. There's been tragedy in some of the members' lives. I don't know exactly when it was, about 4 or 5, in the last 10 years. Neil Peart's wife died, and his daughter. So his wife died from cancer. His daughter died in a car crash. I mean, that's pretty. His daughter died in I think, 93. It's pretty devastating thing to go through, of course. And at this point, they're not a band anymore. I mean, there's been rumors that Rush would start with Lifeson and Lee, but that has never materialized. I'm beginning to think that's not going to happen. Peart is definitely, I guess, with the tragedies and maybe the road fatigue, maybe a bit of everything. He's pulled himself out of the band, so that's a done deal as far as that goes. And I'm wondering if these 2 other ones would actually hire a drummer and go out. Maybe they wouldn't call it Rush, because maybe that would be somewhat disconcerting to Neil Peart that he was such a big part of the band, and he leaves and they just throw the name back into the business and throw somebody else in the drummer's seat. Or maybe they'll just get another drummer and call it the Lee Lifeson Band, and that way there's no Rush name. I don't know what they'll do. They haven't said anything, so it's just pure speculation on my part to assume that they will go back there. Like I said, rumors have been. They're basically saying there's no news about that. That was my background on the Rush history. There's probably a lot of more things I left out, but like I said, I'm not here to go over every detail of the band's situation. Here, before I start going on the top 100 guitarists, I don't remember if I mentioned this or not, but there's a little story that came out about the Lindsey Buckingham firing. Stevie Nicks was doing some, like the band appeared and there was some kind of a thing where Stevie Nicks talked and said some things, and she tends to be long-winded. And during the talk, while the other members were on stage, they were all kind of like making faces, or, I think Mick Fleetwood was making a bit of a grimace, and Lindsey Buckingham apparently was smirking during Stevie Nicks' talk. So we all know Stevie Nicks goes way back with Lindsey Buckingham. They were a couple, then they broke up, and he went off and married someone. She went off with different people, whatever. I don't know. It's mostly, they broke up, but of course, they ended up needing each other to be in the band since they were producing massive records and making fortunes of money. You kind of need, they're both integral parts of the band. But then there was a discussion after where Stevie Nicks noticed that Buckingham was kind of mocking her, and she called up Irving Azoff, who's the manager who also manages the Eagles, and said, I've had it with this Lindsey Buckingham being in the band. I want him out or I'm quitting. So I guess they had to figure out who they wanted more. And since Mick Fleetwood might have been bugging her, she didn't ask for him to be fired because, let's face it, he probably owns the name. Since it's Fleetwood is his name and Mac is the other John McVie, you're pretty much sure you can't get rid of those guys without them leaving on their own, because then they own the name and you have to pay them all the money and they're not even performing. So she went after Lindsey, and Lindsey was kind of got a call that he had to. There was some message from Irving Azoff that it was her or him that would leave, meaning Stevie Nicks or Buckingham. So here, Lindsey Buckingham apparently thought that it was actually about her leaving the band, but he got clarification from Irving. And the clarification was that, no, it's you. You're gone. So Lindsey Buckingham is not there. And that's why you have Mike Campbell from Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, and Finn. I can't remember which Finn. There's two Finns. Doesn't matter. From Crowded House is also in the band. So they needed two people to replace him. And they're moving on. Fleetwood Mac's been about evolving. I mean, Peter Green was a big deal back in the 60s. He left, and about 5 or 6 other guys over the years have come and gone, and they left, and they always continued. So they're obviously an oldies act, Fleetwood Mac, and I guess since Lindsey Buckingham was not an original member, but he's been there for many years, left in the 90s, came back. I guess it's kind of one of these bands that just... they're naturally has conflict. I mean, they kind of slept with each other. Christine McVie slept with probably Fleetwood and her ex-husband, John McVie. Then I'm pretty sure Stevie Nicks, well, obviously she slept with Lindsey, but they were a couple. But then I think one of the other guys too, either McVie or Fleetwood or whatever. So it's kind of a weird bunch of characters in the first place, but musically it really worked. So obviously, here we have a new era of Fleetwood Mac. So that's just an update of the story that I had recently heard about. So I thought I'd bring it up. And then we will get to the list that I was discussing, which was the top 100 guitarists of all time. I think, okay, I'm going to find where I last left off. I'm pretty sure I will remember. I'm not far from there. I think I mentioned Link Ray the last time, and I'm up to Mark Knopfler, who's number 44 according to these guys. So the 44th best guitarist, according to Rolling Stone. You're listening to Eddie G's Music World for October 15th, 2018. And I'm continuing down the things I'm needed to do for this week's show. So Mark Knopfler, we all know the story. Can talk about dysfunctional, but he was in a band. His brother was also in the band, and they didn't get along too. So another one of these Oasis type of things where the brothers hate each other. And I remember Dire Straits coming out with that Sultan Swing in 1978, and it was really played a lot, and I got a little tired of it. But then they had other good songs like Brothers in Arms. So he's a great guitarist, but he's not like a Hendrix style. He's just got his own picking style that he's known for. He had that big connection with Sting, Money for Nothing. That was a big seller too. And I know when they were they got in the Hall of Fame, Dire Straits. I'm pretty sure neither of the brothers showed up, or at least Mark Knopfler for sure did not show up to the induction. So he's the main guy in the band, didn't show up, but other members, like 2 or 3 other guys that were in the band, did show up. So I guess Mark didn't really feel like it. Maybe didn't get along with those guys anymore. There's been one of those bad blood situations in Dire Straits, and that's why they don't tour as Dire Straits. There is no Dire Straits. As far as I know, maybe they're touring without him, but he's touring without them for sure. And he just goes around and does shows as Mark Knopfler. So that's number 44. Number 43. Oh, I'm stuck with a guy that I don't know. Here we go again. Number 43, Hubert Sumlin. Apparently Jimmy Page liked this guy. Must be a blues kind of guy. Yeah, he played the blues. Old songs from way back when. I think he worked with Muddy Waters at one time. He did pass away in 2011 at age 80. I know that people who are real great guitar aficionados and fans of the guitar will probably know who this guy is. If you're one of these really heavily into blues guitar, you'll know more about Hubert Sumlin than I do. So that's about all I can say. Number 42, Mike Bloomfield. This guy I do know a little bit more. He had a band called Mike Bloomfield. I think it was Blues Band. I'm pretty sure Elvin, he died in 1981 of drugs. He kind of was associated with Bob Dylan. I think there's some connection with Paul Butterfield Band. He did some work with them in the 60s. I'm trying to I know that there was some other Fooled Around and Fell in Love was Elvin Bishop Band, and that was Mickey Thomas from the Starship. I think there might have been something to do with Mike Bloomfield too, but I think I'm mixing up my blues guys because it's not my thing that I know a lot about, so maybe I'm getting it mixed up. But I knew, though, the name Mike Bloomfield. I know that he was very influential. Santana had a lot of good things to say about him, but that's as far as I go with Mike Bloomfield details. Number 41, Mick Ronson. I do kind of know a little bit more about him. He was a big part of the Bowie scene. He did a lot of he was Bowie's guitarist pretty much during the Ziggy Stardust days and after as well. I think I remember reading that he did the clapping on the John Mellencamp song, Jack and Diane. It was his idea to clap during it, and he did the clapping as well. So he played guitar for Mellencamp too. Lou Reed as well. Morrissey, since Morrissey wasn't with the guy from the Smiths now, Johnny Marr, so he probably played with Morrissey, Mick Ronson back then. Ian Hunter, he did something with him. So him I know quite a bit about. I do think he did. Did he pass away? Jeez. I have a feeling he did about in the last 5-6 years. Like a lot of these rock stars, they're not lasting. They're getting old, and we just lost last week Marty Ballin from the Starship and Jefferson Starship and the Jefferson Airplane. One of those two. And I think every month you're going to see another big rock star pass away. They're getting old. Moving on, number 40 on the top 100 guitarists, according to Rolling Stone. Tom Morello. I hear about this guy constantly because I listen to this Eddie Trunk show, and he's buddies with everybody in the music business. Apparently his best friend is Tom Morello. Talks about him like every week. Tom Morello's, I'm meeting him. He's my friend. He called me. I called him. I'm meeting him. He's going to do the show, whatever. Fine, okay. He was the guy from Rage Against the Machine, whose drummer played with Black Sabbath on a tour that I saw about 2014. He replaced Bill Ward, that didn't make the deal with Black Sabbath. So the drummer from Rage Against the Machine took over for him. I don't know. I'm trying to see if there was anything else that he's really known for. Rage Against the Machine apparently has been nominated for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and on the nominating committee is Tom Morello. He's one of the people. So it's a bizarre scenario where one of the votes to nominate different bands is Tom Morello, and on the list occasionally is Rage Against the Machine, the band that he ran, or is he still there? Don't know. Not that big a deal to me. Never been a massive fan. I know I like a couple of their songs, but not an aficionado or a huge fan of them. But I like I said, when I hear the odd time that it comes on the radio, I do give a listen to Rage Against the Machine. That's his band. Steve Cropper, okay, I know with this guy, he's Duck Dunn and Steve Cropper. They were considered session musicians most of the time. They were part of Booker T and the MGs, who had some instrumentals. Oh, they did work for Carla Thomas, Otis Redding, Wilson Pickett. Many sessions that we don't know, Sam and Dave type of songs. And those guys, as their own band, he wasn't in a band that had major success, but maybe over the years he was considered a successful guy because he was such a great guitarist. They put him on a lot of sessions too. I have a feeling you make a little more money when you're in a huge band than if you're just a session musician. He was in the Blues Brothers movie too. Him and Duck Dunn. They were always doing their. They were always known to be together. Steve Cropper and Duck Dunn. So Duck Dunn. I don't know what instrument he played, but maybe they've just seemed to play together quite a bit. That's number 39 on the top 100 guitarists, according to Rolling Stone. Going to number 38, The Edge. Okay, I mean, is there anything that you don't know about this guy? He wears the hat. Original U2 guy. We're looking at almost about 40 years that he's been in U2, so he's obviously a massive part. He has a very specific sound. I can't put it into words, but it's like a vibrato type of thing. When you hear him play, he has a very easily identifiable approach to playing the guitar, at least on U2. Pretty sure he can do anything, and it's the style that he chooses works well within U2, since they're obviously a massive band. So I did see U2, but it was very far away and lousy, terrible standing room, and guys wanted to start fighting with me because I looked at his girlfriend. I don't know. It was such a miserable experience. I'm not a big fan of massive outdoor shows. I'm cutting them out pretty much. It's going to take a lot to get me to go to an outdoor show now. But that's the one time I did see them. Thing with U2 is, and The Edge and all these guys are overplayed, and I do shut off U2 when I hear them. Like, it's not against the band. They're talented, but it's such a big U2 city where I live that to hear their songs thousands of times over the years, there's no big thrill to hear another U2 song. Number 38 is next, and let's see who it is. Mick Taylor, okay. He was a guy that was known for being the replacement of Brian Jones in the Rolling Stones. Brian Jones died in his pool in the late 60s. And they needed someone else, and they brought him in. I think it must have been 70 or 69, yeah. So, yeah, he died in 1969, Brian Jones, and Mick Taylor was brought in. He did last till about the mid to late 70s. I know that there was some issue where he wasn't getting as much money as he thought he should, and not much really decision-making power that he wished he had, since Mick and Keith were like the decision makers, and the big wigs in the Rolling Stones owned the name, and Mick Taylor couldn't get what he wanted out of it, so he did leave. And I know from reading books, for example, the guy from the Mamas and the John Phillips once was in England and needed a guitarist to add some session work, and he was living in England, and he knocked on his door and just said, "Can you come down to the studio?" And he did some session work for John Phillips. So a guy like that, he made some money here and there touring, but knowing what I've heard and read about Mick and Keith, they're not super generous if they don't have to be. And then after that, he ended up, it was one of those late night talk shows, Fallon or Kimmel or whatever. Howard Stern was on the show as a guest, and he saw Mick Taylor playing guitar in the house band. And he asked Mick Taylor, "Why did you leave the Stones? What kind of a move was that?" Half jokingly, but of course probably wasn't something that he didn't reply. As far as I know, he was just doing his job, And I know that he's been added back in the band for tours since they know how good he is, and they do a lot of songs from the 7 or 8, 9 years that he was there. Like "Can't You Hear Me Knocking" was his solo and other things. So he's been blended back in to the Stones, and goes on tour. Whether or not he's on another album of theirs or not, I don't know. I don't keep track of new Rolling Stones albums. I'm sure there was one a couple of years ago. Don't know if he contributed or not. Okay, we're heading to the next number, 36. I wonder who it is. Randy Rhoads. Okay, here's a guy. Trying to think if I saw him. It's another one of those things where I saw Ozzy about 83, but if it was 82, which is possible, then I saw Randy Rhoads, but he died in 82. So I don't know if I saw him live with the Ozzy tour, because I can't be sure of the year. I'd have to look up the ticket stub, and it's really not that important if I saw Randy Rhoads or not. But he was a great guitarist, and died at 25. I know a bit about how he died. I think he was fooling around on a plane, and it was one of these private prop planes or whatever. He was in Hollywood. Whether he was flying it or not, I don't know. He was on the plane, of course. And he crashed into a house. That was the end of him. He was in Quiet Riot. He co-founded them as a teenager, so before Ozzy, obviously. And by 1979, he was with Ozzy. And it's his guitar on Crazy Train, Mr. Crowley, that kind of thing. And he in the metal world, Randy Rhoads is, really worshipped and known for his solos. And that's it. I mean, 25, that was the end of it. But if people talk about great guitarists, they seem to throw his name in there quite a bit. And I'm pretty sure I didn't see him because I would have had to have been 22, and I don't think I saw him at 22. John Lee Hooker, okay, number 35, another one of these blues guys. And I have heard his stuff. When it comes to blues guys, John Lee Hooker, Lightning Hopkins, B.B. King, Albert King, all these guys, Muddy Waters, whatever, it's just never been anything that I've given enough attention to. I wouldn't say that I don't like it. It's just there's so much time in the day, so many things to do, so many other types of music that I just never put a lot of time into listening to these kind of people that much, like blues guitarists. So I see and I read about all the influences he had. ZZ Top says they found him, you know, they covered some of his songs, The Doors, Bruce Springsteen, and Santana, you know, was into him too. So rather than go on and on about someone I don't know much about, I'll just say what I know, and that he's super popular, super talented back then, and a major league blues guitarist. Number 34, next. We're going to get a lot of these blues guys, I'm pretty sure. Curtis Mayfield, he was been around for many years. I think he electrocuted himself. He was doing a show, and something about the wiring, and he died. I think that's the guy. They had a song called Superfly. People Get Ready was an early song of Curtis Mayfield's. He was in a band. Move On Up was another good song. So I've heard him back and forth. And like I said, another guy, not a blues guy per se, kind of moved into soul, R&B, did write songs, did produce, very influential guy. And The Impressions was one of the bands he was in or running. Hendrix called him an influence too. And for sure, it's a guy I know more about than let's say Hopkins that I just discussed. And the death, of course, was pretty well documented. That I remember that he was electrocuted while doing a show. Let's see if we can figure out the next one. Who's a great guitarist that has not shown up yet on the list? Is it going to be a guy that's in a band that I know? Let's guess Angus Young. With that. Prince, wow. Okay, yeah, sure. Great guitarist. Do I need to go into much details about Prince? Pretty much everybody knows about his solos in Purple Rain and the fact that he died about 3 years ago. Too many pills, too many thrills. Great soloist as well. When Harrison was inducted, he did While My Guitar Gently Weeps on the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction in 2004. Many hits, but now the funny thing is about this not poor guy, is I never got the feeling that he wanted his songs on commercials, but I never researched it to see if he said something about it specifically. But I have a feeling that he did not want that. But now that he's died, and I don't think he left a will, his family members are trying to make money, obviously. Maybe the record company too. And Let's Go Crazy is on some kind of credit card ad. So whether or not Prince would have signed off on something like that, I have no clue, but I'm guessing no. I think Bruno Mars is kind of a little bit of a, how shall I say, he's kind of Prince light, you know. He's got the same approach. He dances, he sings. Whether he writes great songs or not, I don't know. They're kind of good poppy R&B type of things, and he's also short like him, and he dances. So maybe it seems like he's kind of moving into that that. But I think Prince is a lot more talented, and I've had chances to go see Prince a couple of times, never did. The last time he was here was about 5 years ago, and he has a habit of going to a big show, like let's say a Bell Center, or, huge show, and then he picks a little club to do it too. Like, he doesn't announce it, but maybe some other rumors get out, and he just pops in on a small club and does that. I know that he did a private show for 100 people where Howard Stern was at the show, and it bugged Howard Stern a lot because Prince closed the lights during the performance, so Howard didn't like that. But I don't think he cared at the time what Howard Stern thought. Anyway, tragic death, of course, like a Michael Jackson situation, dying through painkiller. Well, yeah, it was painkillers. He was getting medication through different ways. And obviously, the mix didn't work out for him. But a great guitarist, great producer. One story is when he was first signed to his record label, he was only 18 or 19, and he said one of the conditions is he produces his own album. Well, the record company refused that, but then they saw him rehearsing and in the studio, like, he knew how to produce records. So the record company executive said, you know what, let the guy produce his own album. It looks like he knows what he's doing, and obviously it worked out for everybody. Billy Gibbons, a guy I've seen about 2 times in the ZZ Top. The 2 bearded, he's one of the 2 bearded members. The third one is named Frank Beard, who up until lately hasn't had a beard, but his name is Beard. But I think he might be growing one here and there. But he met Jimi Hendrix back in '68 when he was starting. He had a band called the Moving Sidewalks, and he opened 4 shows in Texas for Jimi Hendrix. So they met each other, and I think Hendrix pretty much liked the way he played. He gave him rumor is that he gave him a pink Stratocaster as a gift. Anyway, we all know who ZZ Top is. They had a bit of a bluesy beginning, and then they kind of went from this kind of not underground, but kind of FM rock type of band, and they exploded onto the I'd say by the early to mid '80s. All of a sudden, a band that I knew that did kind of like more laid back stuff, like Lagrange or whatever, exploded into the scene with songs like Sharp Dressed Man, Legs. Legs has been in commercials for stockings, different things. So they really, really changed direction to a much more commercial style, but their music was still good. So they didn't sacrifice their talent to become more poppy. They still were amazing. I saw them the first time in an outdoor rain-soaked thunderstorm concert with Cheap Trick, and it was so miserable. I was getting poured on. My shoes were soggy. These guys played their new album, which never was a big deal. It was 1995. I think it was something Honey or whatever. I don't know what it was called. And I unfortunately had to sit through 6, 7 of their songs that I didn't know. And I left because I just couldn't stand being rained on. But a friend of mine stayed, and he said after I left, they played about 8 or 9 of their more popular songs. So could have heard all those hits back then, but because I couldn't stand sticking around, I left. So, but 20 years later, I saw them again, and I got to hear all those hits. And it was a very bad day for me because the last time I saw ZZ Top, not only did I choke on some food, I was thrown out of a restaurant bar because they thought I was drunk, because I was choking and acting like I couldn't keep the food down. So the security guard threw me out of the restaurant. I wasn't drunk. I'm on medication for that now, so I'm fine. And also, my hip was very, very, very bad shape. I was climbing up and down massive amounts of stairs from the metro to get to this concert. And, I was in agony, so it was a pretty hard. Every time I see ZZ Top, I experience some kind of discomfort. Either I get poured on, or my leg hurts, or I get thrown out of a restaurant. So I'm not going to see them again. I don't need more problems. Number 31, Ry Cooder, one of these guys, a bluesy guy, but not black. See, most of these bluesy types of guys are black, but he's not. Kind of a folky too, you know. No, there's no song of a Ry Cooder song that you can pinpoint. Oh yeah, that's Ry Cooder, because let's face it, he's not known in the pop music world. He's not. It's never been his approach. He's been a guy that does well over the years, puts out records. People who are into that type of guitar, they go out and buy it for sure. But he's worked on stuff from the Stones, Randy Newman, and Clapton. So he is well respected, well known in the music business. But you didn't turn on Top 40 radio back in the 70s, 80s, 90s, whatever, and hear a Ry Cooder song, because it was never his style to have commercial type of music. So I don't know his music at all, but I know his name. On the top 100 countdown of the greatest guitarists on Rolling Stone, Elmore James. So we're back to another way to show my ignorance about blues types of guys. Elmore James. So they associate him in the Robert Johnson style. Way back then, slide guitarist. And I'm not going to give you a lot of information about him, because if it doesn't mean much to me, there's not much I can really add. And I didn't research him or any of these other people. I either know them or I don't, but That's My Broom. I've heard that before. I think that was him that was known for that at the beginning. And I'm sure if you ask a guy like Eric Clapton, he's going to tell you, you can talk about Elmore James for probably 45 minutes, but I just don't have that major knowledge of him. Let's see, number 29. We're getting close to number 1. We won't get to number 1 today. We will not. Scotty Moore, I think he's number 20. Yeah. Okay, that guy I've heard of. He was Elvis's guitarist, and he was part of the band that played with Elvis in the Sun Studio, Sun Records in Memphis. And I'm trying to think if I can see if he did any work with anybody else but Elvis that he's known for. I'm sure he did, but he did Good Rockin' Tonight. He's a guitarist on that. Mystery Train, That's All Right. These are all classic early Elvis songs. Heartbreak Hotel, Hound Dog, that's all him playing guitar. And I don't really know much more about what else he did do in music, but I listed all the ones he's known for. And pretty sure he must be gone by now or super old, so don't know. Let's assume Scotty Moore's no longer with us, but you can look it up and let me know. Here's a guy I saw twice in concert. Number 28. Fast-paced Johnny Ramone. They're all dead. That I know. The originals. He was... first time I saw the Ramones was 77. And then I saw them in 92, 93. I remember going to a bar called Pretzel Enchaîné, and not a huge place, probably held about 200-300 people. And I had heard about them through music magazines, the Ramones. They didn't get played in Montreal very much. Now you turn on TV, they're in movies, soundtracks, you hear the odd song, like Pet Sematary and maybe more. Definitely you hear Hey Ho, Let's Go everywhere. And you hear, there's TV commercials for sure the Ramones are on. But he was just one of these fast guitars. He wasn't a soloist. He kept the pace very well on all the records. And 2-minute songs. And I'm impressed that they put him up this high. So I've seen a great guitarist. I didn't, never thought he'd be at number 28 in the list of top 100 guitarists. Not because he isn't good, It's just that I never hear his name when people talk about how, the greatest guitarist of all time. You don't really hear his name, but that's just people saying whatever they think. Maybe they don't know. But this list puts him up very, very high. People like Henry Rollins say he's great. Different people have said, how influential he was, especially in the punk. Well, let's see. Because this guy's punk, let's see. Will Joe Strummer end up on this list? Or Mick Jones? They both play guitar. Number 27, let's see. Bo Diddley, okay. The square guitar. Those amazing riffs. Influenced Johnny Marr. Of course, George Thorogood. Definitely took that style and made it his own. He was even in a Bad to the Bone video of George Thorogood. Bo Diddley can be seen. I've seen videos of him in the 80s and 70s running around and playing that sort of odd-looking guitar that he had. It was square, but he had other ones too, but that's the one I remember. And he himself, he had some minor hits like the song Bo Diddley, Roadrunner, Who Do You Love? That's probably the tie-in. That is the tie-in to George Thorogood, who also did Who Do You Love? Okay, so he covered it. And the Clash brought him on tour in 1979. You know what? I saw the Clash in 1980, and I didn't see Bo Diddley then. Would have been nice to see Bo Diddley open up for them. Instead, I got some other band. I can't remember who they were. But the Smiths kind of took that riff style for How Soon Is Now. And he definitely was influential. You can't argue with that. And I did hear him here and there on the radio over the years. But he was never a guy like a James Brown that got all that praise, He was really big in the guitar world, but not massively successful. He did Jimmy and the Hand Jive. I remember that. And I know he passed away in the last 12, 13 years. But Bo Diddley, I do know his music pretty well. So for sure he should be in this list and high up as well. Number 26, let's see who we have. Brian May, okay. I saw Queen, must be 3 or 4 years ago, without Freddie Mercury. And Brian is still in the band, of course. He's an original member. I think he's a doctor too. What did I read about this guy? He's some kind of a doctor of something. I don't think he's a surgeon, but got some degree in something. And he has a super distinctive style. It sounds like it's like two guitars in one. I don't know how he does it and what he's doing different than other people. But he's certainly a great guitarist. You hear him in Queen. He instead of a regular pick, he's used a coin. I've heard that. But however he does that style, it's very, very distinctive. You know it's Queen as soon as you hear it because of the way he comes up with it. So for sure, Brian May, did see him live and was very, very impressed with his playing. And a very soft-spoken guy. He's not one of these guys that likes to bring a lot of attention to himself. And I wonder where Eddie Van Halen's going to be on this list. Could they put him number one? I mean, he gets all the attention and all the praise. I'm assuming Hendrix, Page, and Eddie Van Halen are coming up. Just a guess, and I do not look in advance. Let's see number 25. Tony Iommi, wow. Not shocked to see him in this list. Of course, original Black Sabbath member. Saw Black Sabbath twice. He was in both of those versions because they've had a lot of changes, but he's always seems to be in the touring Black Sabbath, which I might have heard that they're done. But when it comes to money, whenever you splash a lot of money in front of Sharon, which is Ozzy's wife, you know, she might make a call to Tony and say, buddy, you want to pick up another $5 million? We'll go on a world tour. But maybe he's tired of it, you know. The famous story about him is when he was a metal worker in the 65, 66, 67 era. He had a certain job to do in on the assembly line or whatever, and they changed the guy who did the part before he got to the piece of metal, and that guy didn't know how to do it properly. So it wasn't set up right for Tony, and he cut off one part of one finger and a part of another finger. But he adapted those fingers to play. He built his own rubber piece that he put on his fingers. For a few years, he played with that. And I know after that, he started getting professionally made apparatus to extend his fingers so that he could play. And I do know that when I saw them live the last time, I could hear a hell of a lot more guitar than you could do with one person. So I'm sure there was some guy behind some screen or behind a curtain that was filtering and like throwing in a bit of guitar, because how could one guy play two parts when you hear different types of sounds? You know, I'm not saying he didn't do it in the studio. That I don't know. I'm assuming he did everything in the studio. But for sure, you know, that I was a little. I'm still not saying for sure that in the live shows he didn't have help, or I can't be sure that he didn't have help. He might have, but it certainly seemed to me. But he's probably in the Hall of Fame. Yeah, he has to be, because Black Sabbath is in there. I know he was briefly married to Lita Ford, and when asked about that experience, both of them have said separately that it was a very bad marriage, and I think she said he was a little rough, and he said, yeah, it was a little bit hard to, you know, he didn't say he beat her, but he said there was rough times, there were a lot of drugs and crazy stuff happened and whatever. She saw, Lita Ford went to a Black Sabbath concert in the 70s and saw Ozzy and saw Tony playing all together. So she marries one and she does a duet with the other one, like later on in her career. She was pretty amazing that you know, go realize those two things. Number 24. Okay, who would it be? Who have I not thought of? Is there a Canadian guy in there? It's funny, you don't see Randy Bachman on here. I doubt if he ain't going to show up in the next 24 list of 24, you can be sure. I'm trying to think, did I even do Lifeson? Has he been on the list? I don't even remember. Let's go with Lifeson as a guess. Angus Young, wow, I'm not surprised. Listen, I've seen AC/DC 3 times live, and this little guy, the short guy, you can't keep your eyes off him. AC/DC is not only about him. His brother was great too. The bass, he's not longer there. His brother just passed away. Brian Johnson was kicked out of the band because of hearing issues. And then I'm hearing stories that there's pictures of the drummer who was kicked out, Phil Rudd, and Brian Johnson. There's stories that they're kind of been seen together. So I don't know what's going on with that. There's been Axl Rose in this band at some point, but I've seen this guy live, Angus Young, 3 times, and pretty mesmerizing guy. I don't know if it's a schoolboy outfit or his facial expressions that he makes and the running around that he does, but the rhythm was more his brother Malcolm, and the lead was Angus. He didn't consider himself a soloist per se, but it's kind of a heavy metal, hard rock, blues mix that he does, and I've always liked them live and been very impressed with AC/DC on all their records. I have nothing bad to say about them, except maybe when if you do go back out, don't bring Axl Rose in. He's okay. I'm not saying anything bad about Axl Rose, but find somebody new. I don't want to hear Axl Rose singing, or maybe just bring Brian Johnson back. He's still alive. He still can sing great, and didn't sound like he wanted to leave. It sounded like they wanted him to leave. So that does it for my show. I'm going to end it at this point. We're at the hour mark of Eddie G's Music World. I'm going to come up with a retrospect or two, maybe a couple, because I like to mix it up between the top 100 lists or 500 lists and focus on a couple of bands that I do like. So thank you very much. Hope you listen. Hi to Creeper Freak and the Grigster, whose shows I'm on the Grigster show here and there. And Creeper Freak, I like his videos, so I say hi to him too. So Eddie G's Music World signing out for October 15, 2008. Thank you. Bye-bye.